Good Friday afternoon, guys. My name is Jerry Miller, and welcome to the I Love CVille Show. Thank you kindly for joining us. Of course, we're live in Charlottesville, the Commonwealth, the country, and the world on the I Love CVille Network. Fortunately for us in the Central Virginia region, the snow from last night and early into the wee hours of the morning was not as significant as anticipated. Still, many without power, including yours truly. I took the first bath in 5 days at a gym on Ivy Road earlier today, and that's much to the benefit of our guest, Lloyd Snook, who is sitting 10 feet away from me. If this interview was done yesterday, I think it would have been much less approachable for now Mayor Lloyd Snook here at the I Love CVille Network. Judah Wickhauer is our director. He's our North Star and our compass. We appreciate Judah Wickhauer quite a bit. Boar's Head Resort, we're grateful for those folks for partnering with the show. Same with Scott Wagner Integrated Medicine and the fine people at Ting Fiber Internet who power the network. Without much more time wasted, Judah Wickhauer, let's go to the two-shot immediately, and let's welcome who we have dubbed the newly minted mayor of Charlottesville, Virginia, Councilor, now Mayor Lloyd Snook. Good afternoon, Lloyd. How are you?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here.
Thank you for coming. I guess I should have said, good afternoon, Mayor Lloyd Snook. What does that mean to you right there?
Well, it's something, I don't know, I don't really have a reaction to it. I mean, I don't have an ego thing tied up with it. I said all along that I wanted to be the mayor, not because it's an ego kind of a thing, but there are certain things I want to be able to do. Most importantly, I really want to be able to be in a leadership role in hiring the next city manager. And the most important relationship in city government is the relationship between the city manager and the mayor. I want that relationship to get off to a good start. I want to be hiring that person and helping the rest of council hire it. Obviously, it's a council decision, but that's really where the most important thing we have to do, and that's what I want to get started on.
Challenging question, but a fair one. We have a firm that is now the hired gun city manager for the city of Charlottesville. Here's the challenging question. With the turnover on council, do you expect it will be easier to hire a city manager?
I do. We had a year ago, December of 2020, we had a recruiting consultant on contract, ready to help us hire somebody. The then mayor, Nikiah Walker, refused to meet with him.
He walked away from tens of thousands of dollars.
Walked away from a $40,000 contract with getting paid just, I don't know, a few $1,000 for the time he'd spent. He was able to talk with all the other counselors. Mayor Walker would not talk with him. The reason that she gave for not wanting to talk to him was that she was mad at me. I'm still not quite sure I understand that, but in any event, Mr. Berg said, you know, this is not going to work. I can't help under these circumstances. So his recommendation was to wait until the next election, until after the next election. So here we are. We will be starting back up. Yes, I think we will have better luck going into the recruiting process.
You prioritized in the last council meeting the importance of hiring a permanent city manager. Walk us through the steps of how we do this.
Well, so the first thing I should say, by the way, is that the interim situation here is that we will, although we have a firm involved, the Robert Bob Group, what they're doing is they're going to provide us with a number of resumes of people that they work with who would be eligible and would be available to help on a temporary basis. So we will have an actual human being as the interim city manager. The advantage to this arrangement is that they are going to be under contract to the Robert Bob Group. The Robert Bob Group is under contract to us. It's just a different dynamic in terms of being able to get somebody willing to come here for a short period of time. We don't have to get involved with severance packages and buyouts and all the rest of that stuff. That's all taken care of up front. We've got 3 different people we'll be interviewing in the next few days, and hopefully one of those will be somebody that we will say, yes, we would like to have you run our city, help run our city for the next 4, 5, 6 months. My guess is that we would then go ahead and also begin the process of advertising for the full-time position. The expectation, just normal expectation here, is if we advertise it, we would have let's say we get it advertised in the month of January. We ask people to respond by the end of February. We do our basic checks. We figure out how we're going to winnow the group down. Probably about April, we would be doing interviews in some kind of a process, and make a job offer that hopefully somebody would be able to respond to be here. Let's say no later than July 1, hopefully earlier.
So we're talking perhaps early Q3 of 2022 that we have CEO of Charlottesville government in play.
I would hope so. I hope it would be the end of the second quarter, but yes.
Let's put this in perspective. What have you learned about this city manager position through your, and by your I mean council in totality, trials and tribulations? More trials than tribulations is fair. Richardson, Blair, Mr. Boyles, the New York Minute of Mark Woolley.
Never actually got here.
Never got here. And then, which frustrated me, you don't have to talk about this, it's my take on this, frustrated me when he's telling Bloomberg Law and he's comparing us to Crazy Town in a global publication. And now essentially a firm that is the acting city manager. What'd you learn?
Well, one of the most important things that I think council as a whole learned, and I'll speak now primarily for the three councilors who are still with us and two who have joined us, is a sort of a refreshed appreciation for the limited role of council in a city manager council form of government. One of the things that we've got to try to do is to recalibrate that relationship. So, for example, I've been talking to a number of people just recently. I was talking to one person who said, okay, for the last couple of years when we've reached out to the city, we've had to, we never knew, were we supposed to be calling the mayor, or were we supposed to be calling the city manager? Where were we supposed to be calling, and where do you want us to be calling? And what I've said is, if it's an operational issue, don't call me. Call the city manager. If it's a broader policy issue, happy to talk about it. That's council's role, broad policy. But if it's an operational crisis, if you've got some major problem that requires immediate action, that's the city manager's job. And let's keep that very clearly in mind. And the folks I've talked to have said, we appreciate the fact that, we know that's the way it's supposed to work. It hasn't always worked that way in the last 6 years or so.
You got a lot of questions coming in. We have multiple media outlets watching the show. Neil Williamson of the Free Enterprise Forum, we will get to your question. Andre Xavier, we will get to your question as well. Obviously, this is an anticipated interview with the new mayor of Charlottesville, Virginia, a man who we have described as one of common sense, reasoning, a man who leads with his brain and not emotion, a man who is willing to represent the community in totality as opposed to a portion of the community, and that's me talking here, which I've said for years on this program. Throw this to you, and this is Neil's question, Williamson. The last round of city manager interviews, Dr. Richardson, were very public. Is the anticipation that this will occur again, where the community will get to know the candidates?
Let me respond, say, first of all, we haven't talked about that. And I don't want to get too far ahead of my colleagues here. I will say that there were a lot of people who, on the one hand, they appreciated the public ability to engage.
And messied it up. And muddled it up, yeah. And didn't actually get us a better result. I think that's accurate.
And to me, the real test of the recruitment of the recruitment practice is, does it get you a better result? And I don't want to be saying right now, oh, we're not going to be engaged in public comment and so on. Simply that we have to recognize the limits of what is involved in one of those road shows. And that's in essence, and we had three people up there, and the only thing we were really quizzing them on was their ability to handle a question on the spur of the moment. And that's not necessarily helpful in trying to decide what the long-run best interests of the city are.
Do we think that it's a position that will be, from a perception standpoint, be appealing or pursued by qualified candidates, or is the collateral damage associated with the previous mayoral regime going to hurt the brand or stigma of CEO of Charlottesville, Virginia?
Well, I think it has. We have to be realistic and acknowledge that it has hurt the brand, so to speak. On the other hand, one of the things we've found is that among the people who are challenged by difficult situations, there are a number of them who have said they're interested. They have been interested. They have put their names forward for whatever reason, and that's good. My goal is, as I said this at the council meeting Wednesday night, is that I want the applicants to see, number one, that we're actually moving forward under our two very good deputy city managers. Ashley Marshall and Sam Sanders, I think, are both excellent, and I have a great deal of confidence in them and in their ability to represent the city to the outside world. They need a leader. They need the one person to be the city manager, and that's something that we've just got to do. So number one, I want an applicant to see that we're not a desperate, falling apart at the seams kind of a situation. Second, people understand if they look at it, they say, okay, this is a city that's got a lot going for it. It's got a stable economy. It's got an educated workforce. It's got, all
great
of the
tax base.
Tax base, everything is good. This is not a crisis situation of, it's not a real crisis. It's a manufactured crisis. It's a crisis that we have allowed to happen to us, but it's one we have a path out of, and it's one that a city manager would look at and say, I can see how I could be part of that path out. Unlike, I look at the example that I've used, and it's kind of a good example for a different reason, Petersburg. Petersburg 5 years ago was absolutely in crisis. They had a financial crisis.
Close to bankrupt, right?
Close to bankrupt.
Yeah.
But they got a really good city manager who was able to get things turned around. She's now been hired to go someplace else, but they were able to turn things around, and they've got a lot of good folks who came in because they wanted to respond to the challenge. People don't become city manager because they want a cushy life. People become city manager because they want to solve problems. Well, folks, we've got some problems for you to solve.
Yeah, let's talk
Come
about
help.
those. Let's talk about those problems. Ray Cadell says, Lloyd and my politics are generally different, but Lloyd Snook is a first-class human being. Ray Cadell offering that perspective. Andre Xavier, we'll get to your question about tourism and travel and positioning Charlottesville as a destination location for the economy's sake. We have 4 media outlets watching the mayor of Charlottesville here on the I Love CVille Network. This is fair. This is challenging, but this is fair. We have a housing ecosystem that's never been more expensive, certainly exacerbated because of the pandemic, driving prices north more so than we've ever seen in Charlottesville or Albemarle County history. That's safe. We have the University of Virginia expanding left and right. That's safe and true. We have the educational gap wider than ever. Private schools very much throughout this pandemic, business as usual. Public schools trying to figure out how they're going to go about business with education that's fair. Problems that are most concerning for you outside of city manager in our jurisdiction.
And let me say, most of those problems are nationwide problems.
That's
They're
true.
not simply Charlottesville. Housing prices, in large part because of COVID, have been going through the roof in all kinds of places. The education gap between private and public schools, where the private schools have been able to make their own accommodations during the COVID times, that has been a real problem. I think that Charlottesville public schools have done about as good a job as we could expect under the circumstances, but it is a suboptimal situation, no question. My standard disclaimer, city council has nothing to do with what happens in the schools.
You just allocate the money.
We send them a check, and that's about it. The big problems that Charlottesville's got, and this will actually tie in a little bit to Andre's question about tourism and so on, as we try to rebuild our economy, one of the sections of the economy that has really been devastated has been our reliance on the hospitality industry, on tourism, and some of that is going to be hard to rebuild for reasons that are not within our control. Obviously, if we've still got Omicron variants and all kinds of other things like that coming, it's always going to be a problem. But I continue to believe that the tourism business, although it sometimes gets characterized as, you're just catering to a bunch of rich people, why should the rest of us care?
It's paramount.
Because the people who work in that business are people who are hurting right now. And if we can get those jobs back, we can get a lot of people in Charlottesville feeling a lot better about themselves and about their situation.
And that's the common sense we've been reiterating here with the show. The deprioritization, for example, of the downtown mall microcosm example as being this playground for only white wealthy folks that like to go downtown to shop and spend their money is not seeing the forest through the trees, because the people that keep the downtown mall running are the folks that often are the vulnerable population that need the jobs and the money to be made to keep a roof over their head. Yeah. So for us to call downtown, and this was a previous regime, a playground for the white and the wealthy, and it shouldn't be a focal point, is not seeing the forest through the trees, and he undoubtedly does. So let's get to Andre Xavier's comment about what your plans are for promoting Charlottesville as a tourism destination, in particular for corporate travel opportunities.
Well, I'll be honest and say I don't have a particular plan for that. There are plenty of intelligent people who do, and we need to be enabling that. I honestly think that it is probably going to be at least another 6 months to perhaps another year before we can see the tourism business rebound to where it was 3 years ago.
That's because of COVID?
That's because of COVID.
Okay.
And also because of dislocations that have come from COVID. So
what's that mean?
Well, we've got continued problems, even though, for example, Mike Rohde at Rapture can't hire staff. That's not just because of COVID. That's because of the great resignation, as it's been called sometimes. And the people who say, hey, why am I working for $9 an hour to run the risk of getting sick and so on? It's not an actual COVID thing, but it's a dislocation because of COVID. And so people have been raising their wages all over the place, and of course raising prices as a consequence. Interestingly, in most parts of the country, even though housing prices have been rising, wages have been rising faster than housing. That's, again, I think, a temporary thing, but it is a good thing if we can make the overall balance of costs and demands and so on balance out.
You have questions from multiple attorneys on the feed. Scott Aaronworth, the Esquire from Virginia Beach, has a tongue-in-cheek question that we'll get to, a respectful one, in a matter of moments. Nathan Evans, the patent and trademark attorney, has this via text. Great news about Lloyd. I'm surprised it's not a bigger development. I think he has the vision to take us beyond what's happened the last few years. Charlottesville is prospering despite the chaos at City Hall. Imagine what will happen when we all work together for the better good about the city and the county we love. And then he adds this. Here's the question. Previous Mayor Mike Signer had an advisory council on innovation and technology. Local innovators and heavy hitters love that council. Please mention to Mayor Snook, based on the influence that he now has as mayor, if he has any plans or priorities of doing a similar advisory council on innovation and technology. Good question.
So let me answer that in two ways. The first is that one of the things I talked about Wednesday night is that I would really like to have Charlottesville government engage the brains of our local very smart people. And that is, and right now we've got a lot of boards and commissions, only a few of which are really kind of policy, the planning commission and so on. But I would like to see, just as we have the housing advisory committee, which I think has been doing great work, Let's continue with that. We've got a couple of committees that have been set up last year to work on criminal justice reforms. There's some things that can be continued there. The first thing I want to do is I want to have a climate change advisory committee. We have a lot of people in Charlottesville for whom that is absolutely issue number one. And they have been trying to get us to do something. For example, to take a look at the gas utility and to decide, should we be subsidizing more gas usage, more gas installations? Should we be doing something different with all of that? I've got people at the university, both the engineering school, the environmental science department, who are saying, we've got great ideas, let us come, pick our brains, please. And here's the first time we're probably going to get to do that. January 18th, we're going to have a presentation from the transit director, Garland Williams. There is an expansion of transit that is likely to come, frankly, with a lot of federal money coming out of the CARES Act or ARPA. I don't even remember which bucket it is, but that's where the money is going to be coming from. What kind of buses should we be buying? Should we be buying electric buses? Should we be buying more diesel buses? Should we be buying compressed natural gas buses as sort of a transitional technology?
If memory serves correct, you have said on record that the electric bus should be the priority.
I have, and I believe that.
Me too.
And I believe that the market believes that. I was an investment analyst before I went to law school, and I don't claim to be a great investment analyst. If you want to talk about what the pork belly futures market looked like in 1974 75, we can talk. But
we won't talk about that.
but the point is that I believe in the market to the extent that as a way of channeling the brains and desires of millions of people simultaneously, there's nothing better. And so when the market has concluded, basically, say the experts, in the year 2022, the cost curves for total cost of ownership for electric vehicles, they are now going to be cheaper than gas vehicles. So starting in 2022, those cost curves will have crossed, and now, from now on, you're stupid to be buying a gas vehicle. You should be buying an electric vehicle. The same thing is happening in the school bus, or in the bus environment. We're now for example, there are now electric 18-wheelers. You can't tell me if you can build an economically justifiable 18-wheeler, you can't tell me you can't build an economically justifiable electric bus.
Well said. Well said.
And so that's going to happen whether we like it or not. The question is, do we want to be with the current technology, or do we want to be behind the current technology?
What is the different question, different topic, the timeline for police chief hiring? We have an interim. Tito has a lot of respect in this community, as he should.
Right.
City manager often hires the police chief.
Right.
With guidance of council.
Approval of council.
Approval of council. Okay, approval is a better word. Because of the precarious position of local government, specifically tremendous open positions, specifically, and I know you can't comment on this, that's why I'm not going to ask you, the lawsuits that are going on. I know you can't comment on that, I won't ask you, I respect you too much. How do you prioritize the police chief hiring along with the city manager hiring? Is the expectation for the community the police chief will be hired following the city manager's hiring? Or can it happen before the city manager's hiring?
Well, one of the pieces of the answer there is something that I ought to know but don't. Back in September, Tito Durrett told me he was planning to retire in March. I think that is now off the table. I think he's willing to stay longer.
I mean, he's a young man.
Yeah, he's been at it a long time.
I know, he has been at it a long time. Since he was a teenager, I believe.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if he's going to stick around and things seem to be stable, there's less pressure to move faster. If things are stable, it may well be that we wait until we get the new city manager, and let that new city manager make that hire. I don't think, at the moment, there is a desperate need to move faster.
Bill McChesney, congratulations to Mayor Lloyd Snook.
Friend since 8th grade.
I wish you Godspeed, Bill says. Bill, we love when you watch the program and contribute. Tough question, fair question though. You had a little friction with members of the activist community on Wednesday, Tanisha Hudson, and there's since been a little friction on social media, which you responded to on her page, where there were some threats made by her, and there was and it was associated with the 3-minute allotment of speaking during council meetings. You have reiterated, and I thank the Lord's name that you are doing this, that you are going to hold speakers accountable to the 3-minute time limit. So this is a two-part question. The first one's going to be challenging, okay? And you know you have to deal with this. You are a white male, an attorney, a business owner, homeowner. Many folks would say a man of privilege. I would counter that by saying freaking privilege the man has earned through hard work.
I acknowledge privilege.
Okay, but privilege he's earned through hard work though.
Yeah.
Okay. How do you think, A, the activist community is going to respond to you as mayor, and then B, the plan for 3-minute enforcement at these public meetings to make them not become freaking marathons?
Yeah. Well, the first part, let's see, let me deal with the second part first, the 3-minute rule. Number one, what happened, just to tee it up for the folks who weren't actually watching at 11:30 on Wednesday night, we have a public comment period at the beginning of the meeting, at the end of the meeting. At the end of the meeting, frankly, it tends to be a few diehards who have stuck with it till the bitter end. And
the same diehards.
In many cases, yeah, the same diehards time and time again. And early in this second public comment period, Don Gathers, one of the regulars, talked, and he had a 3-minute comment, and he was just about to go over the limit, and I was just about to say thank you, Mr. Gathers, when he started in on what sounded at first
as in conclusion.
Well, kind of an in conclusion, and you don't want to be rude to people. People can see the 3-minute timer on their own computer if that's what they're looking at. And so, but he started into something, and it sounded like, to me, like he was wrapping it up. And so I didn't cut him off. And he probably went on another 45 seconds or something like that. So now we go with three or four more people who are speaking, and then Tanisha comes on. And so she goes over 3 minutes as well. And at about 3:30 or so, I think I said, thank you, Ms. Hudson. Or there was a pause in what she was saying. And then she got mad at me for, why did you cut me off? You didn't cut off Don Gathers. And then we just went on. Well, she had a social media post where she was complaining about that, and she was threatening to sue.
Threatening lawsuit again. 2.0 lawsuit.
Yeah. And threatening that she was going to sue the city, all because I cut her off. And I said, listen, you do not have a constitutional right, a statutory right, any other right to speak for more than 3 minutes. When people get to 3 minutes, I look for an opportunity to cut them off without being rude. And the one thing I will be consistent on is when you get to 3 minutes, I'm going to be looking for a way to cut you off without being rude. And that's that. I don't know whether she's made any other further comment beyond that. I don't know. But the first question, the first piece of the question, and I should say, by the way, that one of the things that will likely change, and this is, I say likely because I've been talking with my colleagues, is that we think, as a general matter, number one, it makes no sense that we start a meeting at 6:30 but don't actually get to the meat of it until 9 o'clock.
Right.
And part of the reason is that we have had literally an hour or more of public comment. Many of the comments have nothing to do with what's on the agenda for that evening. So the people who are tuning in, who have a particular issue that they're concerned about, their time is basically being wasted. it's still good. I mean, we need to hear from the public. Don't get me wrong. It's not wasted from our standpoint, but the people who are trying to pay attention, who would like to get to know what the issue is, to hear the issue decided before midnight, they get very impatient with that. And we've heard that from a lot of people. Why do you take so long? Well, one of the reasons why things had taken so long, frankly, was that Mayor Walker often responded to the public commenters, and sometimes her responses would go for as much as an hour. Not all at once, but
in totality.
In totality. Our own rules suggest that if a comment can be made in about 2 minutes, that's fine. And so we have made some 2-minute comments. I made some 2-minute comments. But we may well get to the point where we say we're going to limit the public comment at the beginning of the meeting and let it go more at the end. Again, on the theory that we want to get to the meat of the business of the agenda earlier for the benefit of all of the other participants. So that's one thing that may change. But the question of how the activist community is going to relate to me.
Have you thought about that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And there are some people who look on me as, hey, 68-year-old white guy, lawyer, establishment Democrat, for whatever that means. There was a time when I was regarded as one of the bomb throwers in the Democratic Party, and I don't think I've changed very much. I really don't. But that's
you haven't changed, but times have changed. Ideologies have changed.
Times have changed. And let me touch on something you had mentioned earlier. I think before the show actually began, this notion of me being characterized as a centrist Democrat. On a national political scene, the centrist Democrat these days means Joe Manchin. I am significantly to the left of Joe Manchin.
Centrist for Charlottesville.
Centrist for Charlottesville is probably accurate. But if by centrist you mean I want to make things work, that's centrist. The progressive changes that I am looking for are things that anybody would regard as progressive. I'll give you an example. The Police Civilian Review Board ordinance, I spent probably 100 hours over the course of the last 6 months trying to fine-tune the language of that and to get it so that it made sense and so that it's workable. The original draft that had come to us was confusing, it was redundant. You couldn't graph it, you couldn't chart it out with a flow chart to show where things were supposed to go. And I spent a lot of time trying to make that work, and the result is we now have an ordinance that, first of all, I think will work. It is workable if the people will get to work on it. Second, that it is possible to chart it out to see what's supposed to happen and to understand it. And third, happens to be the most progressive police civilian review ordinance in the state. It gives more authority, but subject to reasonable limitations. So the first question, for example, was, who's going to run the department? Is it going to be the police chief or is it going to be the PCRB? My answer from the very beginning was, it's got to be the police chief. If a review board wants to review what the police chief has done, that's fine. But it's not the police chief, it's not the police civilian review board's job to run the department. And so focusing on things like that, we've now got an ordinance that I think has the capability of being very workable, of being acceptable to the police department. I spent a lot of time trying to go back and forth between counselors, the police department, the current members of the PCRB. There are some people out there who are still upset with various things, various choices we've made. I can't change that. But we've done our best, and I think we've got a good product. And if people look at what we're going to do and what we actually end up doing, you will see we've allocated an awful lot of money to affordable housing projects. We're going to allocate a lot more to affordable housing projects. These are things, the housing consultant people told us, you all are punching above your weight.
What does that mean?
You're doing more per capita, more money per capita. You've got the most complex set of programs, a set of programs you don't find any place of less than 500,000 people, for example. But those are the programs we're dealing with. That's the kind of expenditure we're making. So we're doing great progressive things. And to say, he's just a centrist or he's an old fogey or whatever they want to say, misses the point. That we're making great progress on things that, when it comes right down to it, I think that most Americans, if you ask them specific things, do you like this, do you like that? They like those things how do they describe themselves? They would describe themselves as more conservative than their actual preferences are.
For sure.
I'm focusing on what the actual policies are going to be, what the actual programs are going to be, and I really don't care too much about the language that people want to attach to it.
Well said, well said. I'm going to throw this to you. Two-part question again. Biggest regrets of the first 2 years and most proud policy or item of your first 2 years on council?
Biggest regret is that we never...
You had a tough 2 years, man.
It was a tough 2 years. My biggest regret is that we were not able to keep a city manager. First of all, I thought Teron Richardson should have stayed. Can't change the fact that he resigned, but that's a different issue. I wish we could have done something more to keep him from being in the situation he felt he was in. And a lot of the other decisions along the way relating to city manager stuff, it all starts at the top. And when you've got chaos at the top and you don't even know who's sitting in the big chair, it's really hard for the rest of the city government to make any progress at all. So that's one reason I've been so delighted with Ashley and Sam, that number one, they're very capable people.
They're deputy city managers.
Deputy city managers, very capable people. They work well together. They work well with us. And they will work well with whoever the long-term person is going to be.
Positive? Most proud of?
I think the fact that we finally did get the Civilian Review Board ordinance passed. You may remember a few years ago when the first Civilian Review Board ordinance was passed. It was passed at sort of the tail end of the last administration, of the last batch of counselors, and it was passed in a way that was really messy. The Civilian Review Board people, with the help of legal aid, had submitted a draft. It went to the city attorney's office and the city council and the city manager's office, and a whole bunch of stuff happened over a weekend as a result of which a new draft emerged that had never been vetted, that had never been discussed publicly. In fact, it was almost one of those situations where members of council had to read it to find out, they hadn't read it really until they got up on the dais. So that was a chaotic situation, and from the get-go, people were saying this ordinance is badly flawed. And it was. It was flawed. Now, frankly, one of the problems back then was there was no enabling legislation from the state to make clear what we were allowed to do. So they were doing their best to try to feel their way in a very murky situation. But the process was flawed. This time around, we had the PCRB working, a couple of members from them, a couple of members from City Council. We were working along with our new director of the PCRB, along with Deputy City Manager Ashley Marshall. A lot of other people were participating in this, in coming up with the final language. And we got to the point where, when we finally had the meeting, we were down to about 3 issues that we were really talking about. And I think that that's an example of how, if you work the process right from the beginning, you can get to good decision making. But when you just throw everything up there into a council meeting without having done that kind of preliminary work, you get chaos.
Stephen Long's watching the program. Here's what he has to say. I live in Albemarle County, but I own a business in the city, so I follow city politics much closer than I follow Albemarle County politics. Please ask Mayor Snook this question. Does he feel the city of Charlottesville is going to be in a position where it can move forward now that the bickering potentially is behind us and citizens can focus on policy and decisions leadership makes, as opposed to focusing upon the arguing and the bickering that's reported by the media?
Well, I certainly hope so.
That's a fair question.
Yeah, and I will say that the 5 of us on council are committed to not bicker. Certainly not in public. Doesn't mean we'll agree on everything, but we're not going to see the kind of things we've been seeing over the last few years. And I will say, some of it preceded Mayor Walker. I mean, it wasn't just Mayor Walker. It's been going on for a while, but we're committed to trying to work on things in a more orderly fashion. That means a couple things. One, as I said just a moment ago, talking about PCRB, to trying to get the process of legislating, because that's really what we are, we're legislators, trying to get the process of the legislation done in such a way that it doesn't, you don't have to do all of your wordsmithing in public, for example, which I think is a colossal waste of time. I hate it. It's one of the reasons I spent the 100 hours or so trying to do all this stuff in private. So if we can get the process of legislating better, then we also can then empower the city manager and the city manager's office and the staff to be the executive branch. We're not the executive branch. They are. Empower them to do that. I get people just the last couple of days writing to me, why hasn't city council done this about the electric power situation, or opening up warming centers or
because
something?
It's not your responsibility.
It's not our responsibility.
Yeah, right.
And my answer was then to forward the message on to the deputy city managers as I've said in one particular case, I have some thoughts about what I think ought to be happening, but it's up to you to do it. It's up to you to make those decisions. I've weighed in. I've told you what I think. Question, should we be having a city pickup of storm damage from trees? As I said to one person, I hope that it'll happen, but when I say that, that's not a mayoral edict. It is a consummation devoutly to be wished.
Which mayor of Charlottesville's past do you most resemble from a leadership or policy standpoint?
Well, I would say
that came up yesterday.
I would say that the person that I feel most comfortable likening myself to.
Can I guess? Huja?
No.
Oh, okay.
Going back further, Frank Buck.
Okay.
And I say that for a couple of reasons. One, Frank was a practicing lawyer while he was a mayor. So he had to make certain accommodations on how he managed his time, as I expect I will. I'm not retired at this point. I want everybody to know, you need a lawyer, give me a call.
There you go.
But obviously, Frank had to weigh things in a very different way than somebody who was basically retired. I will tell you one other mayor whom I admire greatly on a personal level for a whole lot of reasons. And I once said in giving a little talk and presenting an award, I said, I was once asked in a church vestry retreat thing, how do you see yourself in 20 years? And I said, I would like to think in 20 years I will be like Francis Fife. Francis Fife is my model of a citizen, political figure, housing activist, all-around good person. That's who I would most model myself after. But in terms of leadership style or in terms of organization, how I'm going to organize my time, probably more like Frank Buck.
It seems like the three most influential or the three most public engaging or, I don't want to use the word important, positions in Charlottesville government are mayor, city manager, and police chief in no particular order. We have a council that is 4 of 5 people that are white. We have city manager position that's currently vacant and a police chief that's currently vacant. Do we prioritize the hiring of a person of color for police chief or city manager in a time of 2022, fresh off George Floyd's murder, where social justice and social equity are atop of people's minds and on the tip of people's tongues?
I think that what we need is to make sure we hire people who can be seen as responsive to all of those needs and pressures. Not necessarily African American. Certainly, I think we've gotten to the point recently where we can say, I hope we can say we're beyond tokenism, where we've had more than one black police chief. We've had more than one black mayor. We've had more than one black city manager. Or a city manager. I mean, I don't know how you want to characterize it. We have more, both Maurice Jones and Jerron Richardson, completely aside from how you want to deal with Mr. Woolley and some other people. So I think we've gotten past that, but that doesn't mean that at any one moment in time, there isn't going to be a need to make sure that we can look and say, okay, that's the person we know and we can all have confidence in is going to be on the lookout for inclusion issues and equity issues. That's one of the advantages of having a deputy city manager for racial equity and diversity and inclusion. And Ashley Marshall understands that part of her job is to be kind of looking, overseeing things and say, wait a minute, you realize there's an equity piece here. You're missing that one. That's an important piece to the overall equation as well. So I'm not overly concerned about it. I will note that when, after Dr. Richardson left, the decision to reach out to John Blair, of course, who was white, as interim city manager.
That was an obvious choice for interim.
It was a good choice.
Yeah. I'm sorry it worked out the way it did.
So am I. But that was a decision that was Mayor Walker's. When we hired Chip Boyles, that was a contact that Mayor Walker pushed. So she has been pretty clear in it's not important to her. And if it's not important to her, then it shouldn't really be that important to the rest of us. Let's get the right person in there who's going to have the right set of interests, who can bring people together in the right way. And worry less about the color of the skin. That in 2021, 2022, that we're going to have black applicants. We're going to have black city managers and black police chiefs, and that's just part. I hope we understand that although it takes effort to always be in that situation, it takes the effort. But we're going to have those people with us.
You've been on council for 2 years. This is your third year. Third year will be as mayor. That being said, you've been a former planning commissioner. You're actively involved with the Democratic Party, and it's safe to say you have your finger on the pulse. How would you characterize the relationship between Albemarle County and the city of Charlottesville today, right at the conclusion of Mayor Walker's 2-year term of mayor?
Well, it hasn't been adversarial particularly.
It seems to be almost non-existent.
There have not been a lot of contacts.
I've noticed that.
Yeah. And
because we have the supervisors on here, and lukewarm is a complimentary description.
And there have been, and I've talked to a number of people who have been trying to interact with the city in the last few years and have not felt that they were comfortable with those interactions. I'll just leave it at that. And some of those are in the county. The issue that we've talked about the most in terms of city-county relationships has been the downtown parking garage and the courts and so on. Those are projects, the courts project is pretty much, they haven't broken ground on it yet, but the plans are moving along full speed. We're going to come to some kind of an answer on the parking garage. It's clear we're not going to be building the parking garage at this point. But in terms of allocating the spots that the county is entitled to under our agreement, we will get them their spots.
Well, you have to.
We have to, and we will. And we will. So that's potentially a bone of contention. But the point that I want to make to people there is not that the city is walking away from its agreement. The city is choosing to fulfill the agreement in a way that it is entitled to fulfill it.
Yeah.
But it's still fulfilling it. And the only reason, frankly, at this point that we're not building the parking garage is that
the unknown.
Well, and everything, all the disruptions from COVID. We don't know 5 years from now how many people we're going to have working downtown in office buildings.
Right.
And so at a time, 3 years ago, it was pretty easy to project an upward trend. The decision made a lot more sense. Right now, when the parking garage is about a third full most of the time, granted we're still not over COVID, but you'd think we would be more so. There are an awful lot of people who are working from home. A lot of city employees. Our City Hall itself, maybe a quarter of the offices are actually being staffed right now. I'm just guessing, I don't know. But an awful lot of people are working from home. So the need for a parking garage is not so great. The point, though, is that we talked with, as this became evident, we started talking with the people in the county early on to say, we're rethinking this, and it's not because we're trying to renege on the agreement, but it's because blah, blah, blah. And the people in the county are not vicious and mean, and they understand realities just the way that everybody else does. What made sense one time doesn't make sense anymore, but we're still going ahead with the agreement.
I got to give you props on that too, because initially, as you were running for office in the first year of your term, you were very pro new garage.
Right.
And you adjusted your perspective and changed your mindset. And you did that on the fly, or not on the fly, that's not the right description, but you did that understanding like key performance indicators of the market. And a lot of politicians would have stood with their first aspect of conviction and not have adjusted. Well, and you did.
Saying goes, if you can't change your mind, how do you know you still got one?
There you go. And you did. So props to you on that. A couple more comments. Catherine Dabney, hello. Troy Woodson, hello. Linda Bowen, hello. 5 outlets on the show. And then we'll wind down the interview here. DBAC, Downtown Business Association, it's had a rocky roller coaster relationship with leadership of late. Mm-hmm. Is that fair?
Sure.
I am so pro downtown for obvious reasons.
As am I.
As you
for
are.
Obvious reasons.
As you are. How do we? I don't think an olive branch needs to be extended, but how do we rekindle the relationship with the DBAC and what is the most important aspect of the city of Charlottesville, downtown?
I think the first thing that we need to do, and I've had some discussions and some meetings with some of the people who are involved in downtown kinds of things. And while I can't say that, certainly we were not trying to say, okay, let's work out the 5-point plan and get that detailed about it. I think merely the fact that the DBAC will understand, and they do understand, that there's a different mindset in the way that the city is going to be approaching the downtown, and the sense of investment in not just financial investment, but emotional and purpose investment.
I don't understand what that means.
It's not just, obviously they would say, well, okay, we want you to put $100,000 into more lighting on the mall or whatever. That's a financial investment. But to have the sense that when they've got a problem, they can talk to the city and the city will listen. That they can talk to city councilors if the city manager isn't listening. That there are many ways to do some of these things, and sometimes it doesn't mean that the city's got to put money into it. Sometimes the city just has to, have a different policy and enact, some different set of rules, or direct Chris Engel or somebody, do this, do that, and just by being receptive, we get that sense of cooperation. And there's not been a lot of cooperation recently.
This is a theoretical question for you, but I think it's applicable. Have you considered these 2 years as mayor and how they will influence or impact the legacy that is Lloyd Snook in Charlottesville?
I haven't.
Because you have, how long have you been in Charlottesville?
60 years.
60 years, and I would say your legacy is pretty damn good, and your reputation is pretty damn good. These 2 years as mayor, I mean, you're not even in the top of the first inning. You're like in the dugout going to the batter's box here.
I wonder what my walk-up music is.
What would your walk-up music be? It's got to be
probably
something
Jimmy
bass.
Buffett.
Something bass, yeah.
Or Jimmy Buffett.
Jimmy Buffett. Maybe Ray Cadell will be playing that music, and the Big Ray and the Cool Cats. Mike Signer's time as mayor did not go well. Mayor Walker's time as mayor, I'll say it, I don't think it went well. And she had 2 terms there. You have some uphill climbs here. You have housing that is, like I said, more unaffordable than ever. We're still in this Omicron COVID fiasco pandemic. The educational gap inequalities, the social justice piece, the statues are freshly removed. Let's cut to the chase. Charlottesville's getting whiter and richer. It's not getting not.
Right.
You have some things to climb here. You could be, like you said with the city manager, the city manager could come in here, and if the city manager does a good job, and you made the reference to the Petersburg city manager, where the city was almost bankrupt, new city manager could come in here, and if this man or woman does a good job, they could be perceived as taking a couple loaves of bread and a couple of fishes and feeding the hundreds, okay, and walking on water. Same thing with you as mayor. I mean, I've been in this town since the first year at the University of Virginia, since 2020. 21 years. And I have never seen the town in a more precarious position from a brand standpoint, a housing standpoint, education standpoint, a health and pandemic standpoint. You've been here 60 years. So these 2 years of you on dais with the gavel leading the charge could influence your legacy in this community forever in the history books.
It could.
And you have not thought about that.
I have not.
That is amazing. I would have certainly have thought about that. All right, let's close on this.
I'm kind of busy.
Well, I know you're busy. I know you're busy, but your mind's constantly working.
Yeah.
Your mind is constantly. I mean, if you work in the Macklin building, you know that this guy does not sleep. I've been here at midnight when this man has been coming into the building at midnight as I've been leaving. All right, we'll close on this. And you've killed this interview. I appreciate your candor and your straightforwardness. Why are you bullish or bearish on Charlottesville moving forward?
I am bullish on Charlottesville moving forward, first of all, because the underlying conditions of the city are sound. Second, because our most important asset is our population, our people, our people's brains. And third, because there is a fundamental agreement both among councilors and I think among the people in Charlottesville about the basic direction we want the city to be moving in. I think that there is basic agreement, for example, in the affordable housing piece, that we want a multitude of housing choices available for people. I think there is a general consensus that we want to be growing in terms of housing stock, not that we want to become, everybody with a 20-story high-rise, but that we're not going to try to just pull up the ladder and say only the rich people can live here. We accept that that is not a good thing. We want to be leaders in climate change issues and environmental issues. We want to be leaders on racial equity kinds of issues. Now, there's a wide variety of how we go about those things. And what I want to try to do in the next 2 years is to understand, number one, that we can do more than one thing at a time. Number two, that we can focus on the important things and have the things that are distractions moved off center stage. We've got a lot of things we need to be working on, but none of them is an intractable problem. They are all things we can work on. And if we get the right staff, if we get the right city manager, we get the right city staff going, we've got a good council. We can make progress in the next 2 years.
Dude, this is your best interview yet. The guy is A+ people. His name is Lloyd Snook. Hold on, Mayor Lloyd Snook. Thank you. I am grateful for your time. Seriously, thank you. All the best. Best of luck.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us, guys. Lloyd Snook. And Judah, if we can go to the one shot. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I'll close with this. I think this is undoubtedly the right guy to lead the charge. And this mayor position, while in a lot of ways is very much a ceremonious, a ceremony or a pomp and circumstance position, has undoubtedly become the focal point of Charlottesville. And this guy is the right guy to maintain or to embody or to embrace that focal point of Charlottesville. Okay? This is going to be, in a lot of ways, the image that folks will see of this community, certainly outside the community. And I'll say it again, you have an educational gap in the city that is wider than it's ever been. Public schools are still searching for their footing, where private schools, business as usual. Housing, the cost of real estate has never been higher. than it is right now. We're still in the midst of the pandemic. Omicron is as contagious as any variant of COVID there is. Okay? We don't have a city manager, and we don't have a police chief, and we have buku positions open in City Hall that are unfilled. We have an economic ecosystem that's benefited by the University of Virginia, undoubtedly, but the University of Virginia in this economic ecosystem is undoubtedly creating a tech-centric ecosystem that's making the cost of living more expensive and not less expensive. The climb is uphill. In a metaphorical sense, Councilor, now Mayor Lloyd Snook, is at the base of Carter's Mountain, and he has to climb that metaphorical mountain to the peak, and he's going to have a lot of jagged edges and a lot of precarious climbing to do over the next 2 years. But of the 5 people on the dais, this is the dude that is best suited for the challenge. And I'm also bullish on Charlottesville. I'm always bullish, generally bullish, and I'm very bullish in this man. And he did not want to touch this, but I'm going to go ahead and touch it. He's a 68-year-old. I think he said 68. 68-year-old. These 2 years undoubtedly will influence and impact his historical legacy in this community. Whenever and in perpetuity, when you Google the name Lloyd Snook, or you search the name on Lloyd Snook in perpetuity, mayor will be in front of it. That is some pressure. But he's a man that can handle that pressure. That's the I Love CVille Show on a Friday. My name is Jerry Miller. Thank you kindly for joining us. We bring to you content and conversation and analysis in approachable fashion on this network, and we do it, guys, 5 days a week, and we work damn hard at it. Have a good weekend. Stay safe. Take care.